right, guys. So in this video, we're going to talk about the West Indies and the Southern Colonies to kind of round out notes on the main 13 colonies. And so in this short video, we're going to identify the defining characteristics of the West Indies and the Southern Colonies and some of the key differences between the colonial regions. Your main essential question is going to be what were the differences between the colonial regions. And in this short video, there's not any new vocabulary. Things, nothing in here that you shouldn't already know going in beforehand. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so first of all, the defining characteristics of the West Indies. When we talk about the West Indies, we're talking about this whole area here, what is present-day Cuba, and then Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, Jamaica, and then over here we have a lot of just sort of smaller Caribbean islands, Barbados, Guadeloupe, Turks and Caicos, stuff like that. And then, of course, the Bahamian Islands here, and then to kind of give you some geography, this is the tip of the Florida Peninsula, and then this is the kind of edge of the Yucatan region of Mexico, and then here is the top of South America. So it's basically those islands that are in the Gulf of Mexico, kind of off-centered. Those are what we term as the West Indies, and all of these were not owned and controlled by Britain. Many of them were controlled by Spain, and some of them were controlled by the Dutch. But these over here, a few of these over here, especially Barbados, which I think is this one right here, is controlled by the British. Okay, so looking at this, the climate is very warm, so we have long growing seasons. It's closer to the equator, so they can grow tons of crops, and they're going to all be cash crops, especially sugar. Sugar is going to be the main crops that are grown in the British West Indies, which are these islands over here in this region. It's an extremely unhealthy environment, so lots of native inhabitants die off quickly, and so do many of the colonists as well. The economy is, like I said, just agriculture. They're growing cash crops, and sugar is that main crop. Enslaved Africans are going to outnumber whites significantly. And in fact, some of the landowners, the plantation owners, the planters as we call them, are not even going to live on these islands, the British West Indies. They're going to live actually in England, because they're like, it's too unhealthy to stay there. So it's going to be a lot of enslaved Africans and very, very few white colonists living there. So plantation owners, like I said, do not live on the plantation, which is just kind of one of those things where they're like, it's not healthy for me, so I'm not going to live there. And the work is extremely dangerous, and rather than changing up the work, they're just going to go ahead and just continue doing what it is. They're not going to stop it from being dangerous. So the Southern colonies, when we talk about the Southern colonies, we're talking about mainly it's going to wind up ultimately being Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. But initially, it's just the Carolinas are one, and Georgia kind of comes in a little bit later. And so when we talk about the Southern colonies, we're talking about a lot of plantations and stuff like that. So let's kind of dig into some of these characteristics. The Carolinas are going to be one whole in 1670, and then it'll eventually split into North and South Carolina in 1712, and that's kind of just more or less like along cultural lines, differences in beliefs and stuff like that. But we'll get into that later. They're going to be founded by planters from the West Indies, so that's why we started with the West Indies first. So many of the people who are going to establish the Carolinas, this region right here, are going to be from the West Indies, and so that same plantation style of economy is going to be transported to the Carolinas, and will eventually spread into Georgia. But a lot of the ways they think about slavery is also going to be transferred there, and we'll see that as we go through the course of our study. So they're going to cultivate rice instead of sugar because it grows better here. The climate's better for rice instead of sugar. And Georgia is going to be founded in 1732 by this guy named James Oglethorpe. And Georgia has a pretty interesting history. Georgia is intentionally intended to be a reform colony for prisoners. And what James Oglethorpe had in mind was he was going to bring in people who were going to be going to prison in England, and they weren't like these hardened murderers or anything like that, but it was for people who had debts they couldn't pay. England had something called a debtor's prison, And so if you couldn't pay your debt, James Oglethorpe was like, hey, why don't you come to Georgia? You can work off your debt and then get your own land and become a farmer, become a planter, and make something of yourself. So there's going to be a lot of people in Georgia are going to be these pretty much former prisoners, essentially. Initially, Georgia does not allow slavery because it's mostly meant to be this prisoner reform colony. But by 1750, a little not too long after they're established, they're going to allow slavery in order to keep up with the economy of South Carolina, because they start to realize, wait, we can make way more money if we add slavery to the mix. Okay, so some key differences overall between the colonial regions, and we've kind of talked about this before, but I want you to write this chart in your notes so you can kind of have it, understand what it's saying. And I'm really going to focus in on this ethnic diversity and economy. We spent some time on religious freedom and things like that, but I really want to focus in here. And when we talk about ethnic diversity, I want you to pay attention to some commonalities. Yes, we see English all throughout, but notice that we see slaves, and slaves. Okay? In each of these boxes, in each of the colonies, we're going to have a slave population. Some colonies in the northern areas, New England, it's going to be much smaller. It's going to be much greater in the southern colonies in the Chesapeake. But there are slaves in every single colony. Okay, so just please keep that in mind. That slavery exists everywhere, and that's not just in the colonial time period. That's throughout the time when slavery is legal in the United States. There will be slaves in every single state, in every single colony, as we go forward. And again, some differences in their economies. In the middle colonies, where there's a little bit more slavery than there is in the New England, we're going to see a little bit of agriculture mixing. New England, there's not a lot of slaves, but there are some, and there's family farming. And of course, in the Chesapeake and the southern colonies, we're going to see this sort of extensive plantation agriculture. But I want you to write this in your notes so you can have it and reference it when we're going through and studying and talking about differences between the colonial regions, especially when we start talking about the colonial identity, because this stuff, the religious freedom, the ethnic diversity, and the economy are going to really affect how each of the respective colonies will see themselves and come to understand what it means to be eventually American. Okay, so that's it for this video, and we'll get the next video. We'll discuss slavery in Britain, in British America specifically. Okay, take care. Have a great day.